Okay, this is another after action report. I played this today again. I mixed up the forces a bit. Instead of, I got rid of the slow moving Hessians and I reduced the forces on both sides. So essentially, similar situation. The Americans were defending over here, and what they had was they had a militia regiment, an extra large militia regiment, and they had the Second Continental, the Second Pennsylvania Continental Infantry, and they also had light dragoons, or a detachment of light dragoons over here. And on this side, they had, and that was under Colonel Hammer, and under Colonel Smith over here, they had the 1st Maryland, which is in there right now. They had some riflemen who are not here, and they had a 4-pound gun. And against them were a detachment of British light dragoons, presently chasing the militia away. Under, let's see, that was under General Grantham, the 5th Regiment of Foot. Some Jaegers, which ended up being deployed on the other end because they've got the vanguard capability to counter the riflemen. Then there was also under is it Major Hardwood? There was a 17th Foot, which is a large regiment, a gun, and the Grenadiers. And this was actually really a good game. What happened was really, the elements, I'm getting a better understanding of how the elements all work together and what the options are and how important rally is. I didn't keep track of every little detail, but essentially the British started marching forward, and they set up the gun over here, and it was firing long range. And it actually did quite a bit. The guns this time were 4-pounders, and I did use my new optional rules where I treat, to get disorder, you need to put in 2 6s, and you don't get anything special with a ball, but with canister, you get exploding 6s. Although I wonder if I actually remember to do the exploding 6s. I think the canister was notoriously ineffective in this game, just really bad die rolling on the canister. But essentially what happened is the Jaegers and the riflemen squared off, and it was interesting because the Jaegers scored a hit almost right away, which happened in the last game, of course, except it was the opposite way around. And the riflemen had advanced, I guess, close enough, so they weren't at the edge of the table. And the dueling kind of continued between those two. Sometimes the riflemen shot at other people. The riflemen hung around a long time, but eventually the Jaegers inflicted enough damage that they just kept degrading them down to the point where they finally just disappeared. And interestingly enough, they were being rallied by the American commander over here, and he's dead because one of the Jaegers shot him. So, which left them without a commander for a while. But he was an incompetent commander. He got replaced with a very skilled commander. So I threw the Mel Gibson guy in over here. So that was actually interesting. Losing their officer was one of the best things that happened to them. Over with the light dragoons was interesting. Man, there's so much nuance in how do you advance, and because the enemy has snap fire, and how do you advance in such a way that you're going to hopefully be able to get more firepower out than they do to you. It's a real trade-off because sometimes it pays to get that snap fire in, and sometimes, because if you deliver a devastating volley, which would happen with the militiamen, and the rebels did that several times, devastating volleys, they can force your troops back before they even get a chance to shoot. But at the same time, you only get one snap volley. So, if you do one and it's not terribly effective and the other side pounds you 2 or 3 times, that's not so great. But what happened with the light dragoons is interesting. The British ultimately were able to. The British had snap fire. The American dragoons rode into it, and the American dragoons didn't fare so well from that. They still held their position, but they took more casualties from the snap fire than they were able to deliver with 2 sets of shooting their pistols. And on the following turns, the light dragoons charged them, and they were at a slight disadvantage because they were disordered from the pistol exchange, and they got they just had a bad roll and they got completely devastated. So they kind of disappeared the way the Jaegers did in the last game. They got defeated. They ran away. They ran to the edge of the board. They didn't survive the morale check, and then they were gone. And that, of course, was devastating for the American forces to lose them like that. Interestingly enough, the first 2 elements to go on the American side were the light dragoons and the riflemen. So what does that do? Well, for determining initiative, if you recall, you get extra points. You get a point each for each scouting element. And the armies both started with 2 scouting elements, and all of a sudden the British have 2 and the Americans have 0. So what does that mean? It means, 2 added to the die roll for initiative, and that helped the British kind of capture initiative. The British advance actually got utterly pounded. I made the mistake of attaching the British commander Grantham to these guys in the hope that would help them, survive the volleys. They got hit with 2 snap volleys by the American lines that were just devastating. And these troops at this point, they're way back here. They got pushed way back here. I don't think they ever got a chance to shoot. And their commander was killed. So I've got this replacement guy over here, dismounted just to show he's secondary. He was also skilled, but and the interesting thing is they got pushed back far enough that, given time, they could recover up to Shaken. At this point, they're exhausted, but they could recover to Shaken because the Americans weren't able to really move up. Over here, the artillery, I used a lot of optional, commands from the officer to get them up to a position where they could fire a canister. And of course, it wasn't terribly effective. These soldiers over here, I'll just point out the way the whole initiative thing works. The way it worked is it meant in the initial volleys with artillery fire and such, these guys got shot up kind of bad enough that, I wanted to try to rally them off before they lost a level. And the Americans were in the same situation, but just because of the initiative and the order it went, and you follow the process, what it meant was the British commander could not rally them that turn. They had to wait till the next turn. The American commander could and took all the casualties off before they could downgrade. But ultimately, this was decided by the 17th Foot coming up and using their, officers' extra efforts. They were able to deliver 3 volleys that were just utterly devastating on the 2nd Pennsylvania. We're talking about something like 10 hits out of 12 dice, and they were all 6. They're mostly 6s too. It was amazing. So they had 2 volleys like that just utterly devastated the 2nd Pennsylvania. Then they got in a 3rd volley that wasn't terribly effective, but by that point, I think something had happened. The rifleman ran off or something. And at that point, the brigade was broken and everyone had to do a morale check. And they failed that morale check, and leaving a gaping hole. And at that point, the light dragoons came over here and hit the militia, which were actually in pretty good shape in the flank. And it could have been a near run thing because the militia technically had more. Um, well, of course, I don't know if I think I forgot to give the dragoons some of their bonuses, but the militia had a lot of dice, but the light dragoons just got lucky. And of course, when you get to the multiplier section, which looks into things like light dragoons versus troops that are not and can't do battle line, for instance, and such, then of course it really accelerates the damage, and the militia ran, and as it turned out, the when they were at table's edge, if you win the melee and you don't get and you don't aren't forced to take a morale check, you can do it again, and that's what they did, and they took them out, took out the militia. So anyway, it was a very interesting battle. Lots of moments where, okay, well, if that hadn't happened, this thing sure would have gone differently. I was really thinking the British were gonna not do very well, because of some of their earlier setbacks. But this game has a real flow to it, ebb and flow, where if initiative, depending on how the initiative comes up, depending on how many command points your officers get to help the soldiers do extra things. And of course, that's all in addition to the usual randomness that you get from die rolls of shooting and melee and such. It's really, I don't know, it adds a lot of tension. It made it a very interesting game. So anyway, I just thought I would give that report. I'm gonna have to take the table down now. We need to use it for other things.